Hey, Lunch Hour Legal Marketing listeners, this is Conrad Saam, and boy, do I have a special Halloween treat for you. I recently joined Craig Williams on his show, Lawyer to Lawyer, to talk about legal marketing and the lawyer awards industry, which, of course, shares the story of Zippy the Chicken, my chicken who was awarded a top 10% award from Lawyers of Distinction. Now, Craig's podcast is frankly a little more heady than the stuff that Guy and I get into, but we had a really fun conversation, and I recommend you go have a listen to and subscribe to Lawyer to Lawyer. Thanks for listening in, and hope to catch you next week. Ultimately, the power for someone to market themselves through what looks to be a legitimate award, but which is basically just any image of a plaque, scales of justice, stars. It works. It works. I hate to say this. I've seen the data. It works.
Welcome to the award-winning podcast, Lawyer to Lawyer, with J. Craig Williams, bringing you the latest legal news and observations with the leading experts in the legal profession. You're listening to Legal Talk Network.
Welcome to Lawyer on the Legal Talk Network. I'm Craig Williams, coming to you from Southern California. I write a legal blog named May It Please the Court and have 2 books out titled How to Get Sued and The Sled. Well, many of you lawyers have received an offer of an award recognizing you as the distinguished lawyer in your city or state. Perhaps you've received an email or even a message on Facebook offering an award, which might include a custom plaque or an inscribed crystal, maybe an appearance in a publication or a magazine, and all you have to do is pay the membership fees to the awarding organization. So are we looking at pay to play here? Is this a scam? What is the concern for the public? What's the application process? Should lawyers beware? Well, today on Lawyer to Lawyer, we're going to talk about the award industry, the constraints for legal marketing, and what lawyers should do if they receive a solicitation promising an award for a price. And to do that, we have Conrad Saam. After leading the marketing efforts for Avvo, Conrad founded Mockingbird, an online marketing agency focusing exclusively on legal. He's a semi-professional bridge-burning arsonist, and he enjoys publishing cease and desist letters from unscrupulous legal marketing vendors. He's the proud owner of Zippy, the first and only chicken to potentially be awarded the Lawyers of Distinction Top 10% Award, which recognizes lawyers who may have been duped into buying a $700 annual subscription to a plaque. Conrad also co-hosts the podcast Lunch Hour Legal Marketing right here on the Legal Talk Network. So welcome to our co-host here, Conrad Saam.
Craig, so nice to see you again. It's been a very, very long time since we chatted, back in the very early Avvo days.
Back in the very Avvo days, yes, very beginning of those days. And we should, for our listeners, disclose what that means. So go at it, Conrad.
Yeah, so I was this goes back to 2006. I was approached by this little startup at the time that no one had ever heard of called Avvo, and I sat down with Mark Britton and talked about SEO and rating lawyers and exposing sanction information and helping consumers try and select attorneys by using a scale of 1 to 10, which at the time was really, really kind of revolutionary. And at this point in time now with the web, that it seems very almost banal, but it was a very, very different world back then. And that's how Craig and I originally found each other.
Well, and we met because when Avvo first got started, it listed me as having been deceased.
I didn't know that. I'm very sorry to hear that. I see you've made a good recovery.
I wrote a blog post about it, and because Avvo was tracking it through Google Alerts, Mark found out about it, contacted me. We had a great conversation, and it turned out that I ended up coming on Avvo's advisory board and picking up some stock.
And I know you did well with that stock.
I did. Thank you very much. Good job.
Yeah, it was, those early days at Avvo were interesting. I spent a lot of my time talking to dead lawyers, right? Talking to angry lawyers. And I got a trial by fire into the legal industry, but really got to learn about how the legal industry was thinking about the web, being rated on the web, like reviews. The fact that you could review lawyers on this third-party website was a big scandal when we launched it, which now it's like a base level expectation. It was a really great education for me.
And Avvo had a difficult time getting into various states.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Avo did was in embracing the consumer, they to some extent sent a middle finger to the establishment of the legal community as well as a lot of lawyers. And so we 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 went well out of our way to figure out how to get what should have been easily available public information. And there was, lots of technology that we used in order to get that information. But I know the director was not widely loved, especially by the state bars.
Right. Well, let's talk about the award industry, which is the whole purpose of our conversation today, now that we've given those disclosures in our relationship in the past. Let's talk about Zippy, first of all. Here we have Zippy the chicken, who's applied for lawyers of distinction. There was actually a dog also, I believe.
Yep, there are two dogs, Lucy the poodle and something else.
Right. So, I know Avo vets its, and really looks into the lawyers that it rates. And so the lawyers, and I think the general public now consider Avo to be a legitimate rating agency. But what about these ones where you just pay for it?
Well, I mean, the fascinating thing for me is I have access to tons of data. I know that these trust marks, we call them trust marks in the web world, where it's like, oh, I've got an Avo 10 or a this or a that, or people were making up awards when they were trying to influence their Avo rating, right? And so like lawyers were making stuff up, and part of my job was researching all the awards that we had never seen before to see if they were actually a thing. And in many cases, they weren't. And so lawyers were making up awards, and it looks like there have been lawyers who have turned that into a business. And the lawyers of distinction thing was, when I looked into it 2 years ago, and as far as I can tell, I looked at them again this morning, it's a pretty weak vetting process too. The vetting process is, do you have a credit card, right? And the problem for Joe Consumer is that they really don't know the difference between lawyers of distinction, whether or not you're AV rated. Like Joe Consumer thinks of AV as like the place in high school where they kept the overhead projector, right? That's what AV means to Joe Consumer. And Avo is smart in making it a 1 to 10 scale. And we've got the 5-star for reviews now. So there's scales that people understand. But ultimately, the power for someone to market themselves through what looks to be a legitimate award, but which is basically just any image of a plaque, scales of justice, stars. It works. It works. I hate to say this. I've seen the data. It works.
There's a billboard right now here in Los Angeles where Larry H. Parker says he's been voted number 1 in personal injury. And, there's, of course, a little asterisk on the billboard. I've never been able to see what the asterisk at the bottom reads because I'm not going slow enough on the freeway. How can Joe Consumer, Jane Consumer, how do they even begin to vet these rating agencies? And, just because it's got the stars and the voted number 1, and
right.
How do they tell? Here's the question. Is there an agency that rates the agencies? Just like there is, you can do it for charities. There are certainly rating agencies for charities out there. Is there one for the agencies?
Not that I'm aware of, right?
There's a business model waiting to happen.
Interesting business, but I think the problem is the consumer, there's just this blind faith in these ratings. And I don't think the consumer is taking that kind of second step to say, all right, is this a real rating or not, right?
I joke with people that ask me those questions, and I say, you know what we call the person that graduated last in his class from law school?
That's right.
Lawyer.
That's right. Yeah. And it's dangerous, right? I genuinely think it's dangerous for the consumer to be making decisions that are this informed on matters that have such a big impact on their life, but they are uninformed. And I also, frankly, I hate to say this, but I don't see that changing. Right? The AV rating has been around for a long time, and no one who didn't go to law school knows what that is. I just don't see it changing.
Right. And, should the award industry itself be regulated? Is there any kind of requirement within the states that we protect consumers from, these kind of bogus, unvetted rating systems that are out there?
So I've had 2 thoughts, and specific to lawyers of distinction, I've had 2 real thoughts about this. And by the way, I'm not an attorney, so I'm the last person who should be opining on this. But the thoughts that I have had are twofold. One, it's amazing to me. So Lawyers of Distinction is owned by an attorney named Robert Baker, right? Who, by the way, is not rated on Lawyers of Distinction in a fit of irony.
Is he rated on Avo?
Well, Avvo has listings of all the attorneys. He, in fact, is rated on Avvo. And the reason I know he's rated on Avvo is I'm looking at it. He was suspended in New York, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, and now he's in Florida, right? And it just boggles my mind that it's surprising to me that the Florida bar hasn't stepped in. Now, I'm not the person to tell you that they should or shouldn't, but it boggles my mind that they haven't.
What's his Avvo rating?
I don't know. I'm looking at it, just a screenshot of when I wrote the kind of deep dive on it. But the other thing is that I'm curious about this. I mean, this is a legal question that I really don't have the answer to. It's surprising to me that someone hasn't hired a terrible lawyer based on their top 10% Lawyers of Distinction award, had a terrible experience, and basically said, like, the reason I hired this guy is because they won this award, but they're a terrible lawyer. And is there any accountability there, right?
I'm not one to track these cases, but I'm pretty confident that your hypothetical scenario has actually happened, because I've been involved with some malpractice cases, and a common allegation in plaintiffs' cases is that you represented yourself to be, best in the industry, and then they trot out all of these awards, which then backfire on the attorney because you're supposedly in the top 10%, but here you are, you can't even file a motion for summary judgment correctly. So those have happened, but they happen in the context of malpractice cases. And I'm sure there have been a few on some of the state bar disciplinary things that I wonder if there's a search mechanism that would reveal that.
So I'm wondering, I'm making the assumption that attorneys all recognize these rats for what they are, but attorneys are either naive or complicit with this, right? And neither of those two things is a good thing. But I do wonder if I actually have lost a professional friend, and I was trying to explain to her that, listen, this is not an award that you should be proud of. And she was insistent that it was. She didn't get it.
Well, when you get these things, I know that, and in fact, almost the reverse question is a valid one as well, because I have had clients tell me that they retained me because of my Avvo rating.
Right.
And as we both have observed, most clients couldn't tell an Avvo rating from a Lawyers of Distinction rating unless they spend a lot of time reading and doing the research for it, which most wouldn't do.
They don't.
So do I have any kind of concern because my client has found me on Avvo and my rating is a 10 on Avvo?
Yeah. So for me, you understand, and lots of lawyers disagree with Avvo on this, but you understand that it's an assessment of someone's background. It's basically a resume score, for want of something more complicated, but it's basically a resume score. It's built on something. I also think most lawyers should have some level of suspicion that a website that claims to do a background check yet doesn't ask you for your social security number or something with which to perform a background check is probably not doing the background check, right? There should be that level of curiosity in the legal profession that tips people off.
Well, what level of a background check can you do on an attorney as a consumer? At most you can go to the state bar website and see if there have been any disciplinary proceedings.
Well, so that's a fascinating piece, right? So Google got into the business of doing background checks on attorneys, right? When they launched the local service ad. So they were actually doing background checks to determine whether or not that advertisement could show up, right? But you had to submit that to a third-party agency through Google, and you were there's an agency called Pinkerton that was going back and doing background checks on attorneys. And so it's doable, but my gut tells me most lawyers know that in order to do an official background check on someone, you need to validate who that person is. And in order to do that, you need a social security number. And, Lawyers of Distinction is clearly not taking that very seriously.
Well, does Avvo have my social security number? Not that I know of.
They don't. But so I was really, when they're looking at things, they're looking at what they can glean from your resume. Think about scouring LinkedIn and then adding a score to each of the elements that are on LinkedIn and then throwing it in some algorithm, and now it's bit something on a scale from 0 to 10, right? It's not a criminal background check, right? But it is a resume check, right? And then they check the state bars for disciplinary information, right? I think the fascinating thing is the consumer has no ability to understand whether or not you're a good lawyer, Craig. They don't. Even after they've received your services, they don't know if you did a great job or you just mailed it in most of the time. In the same way that like it's hard to determine whether or not your knee surgeon did a great job, right? Can you walk? Yes. Does it hurt? Yes. Was that good or bad? I don't know. Like you really don't know.
Yeah, there's a very difficult standard to measure because the standard is very low. The standard is what is the standard set in the community where you practice.
And so the consumer looks at these third-party things like super lawyers, Avo rating, lawyers of distinction to make that assessment as to whether or not they're making a smart hire. And unfortunately, that assessment is frequently, at the worst case, fraudulent, right?
Right. Well, I want to jump into some of these other services, but before I do, I also want to flip this question. What responsibility does the lawyer, him or herself, or theirselves now, have to vet these awards in the first place so that they're not misrepresenting their skill set to the consumer? I mean, if I know that I can go get the top 10% by paying $700, do I have an ethical obligation as an attorney not to do that if I don't fall into that category? And for that matter, how would you know whether I fall into that category?
Every lawyer I've ever met falls in the top 10%, right? Every single one. It's the Lake Wobegon effect. For me, and again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm definitely not an ethics expert. I'm a marketing guy. And
right, but you bumped up on this question.
I've bumped up into this over and over again. My opinion is that if you smell the rat, like don't cuddle the rat, right? And the problem becomes when no one else can tell that it's a rat. The people who really care can't tell that it's a rat. And that's where you have a problem. My inclination is there are so many other ways for you to demonstrate your expertise and awesomeness that you should not, if you find yourself that this is your last resort because you can't get anything else, you can't get a positive Google review, you can't get your Ava rating up, you can't get a super lawyers, you can't get referrals because no one likes you, this is what you've got left, is to go to reviews that you know are fake. At the risk of coming across as super crass, like, get a different profession.
So don't do it at all.
I can't, I mean, if this is all you've got left, right? I don't know. And yet here's a creepy thing, Craig. 5,000 lawyers are paying lawyers of distinction an annual fee for a plaque that was as easy to get for my chicken as it was for them. That's crazy. Like that's super problematic.
Right. And where is the state bar on this? There's supposed to be some limit on advertising. I'm assuming that we would all agree that this falls under that rubric of advertising because you are holding yourself out to the public as this, whether you are or whether you're not. It's marketing and it's intended as such. So where does the state bar come in on this?
I mean, I can tell you two very different experiences that I've had. One was Avo, which by and large the state bars hated. And they very much viewed Avo as taking referral functionality away from the state bar. Frankly, if the bars had been on top of the web back in the day, Avo may not have existed, or at least wouldn't have existed in the format that you saw it. And so they really pushed back on Avo. And then on this flip side, we've seen nothing from Florida. I've talked to Florida bar people about lawyers of distinction. I've been interviewed. It's not a quiet story. It's not a sleepy story. I was very happy to publish this. It comes up for me about once a month where someone's heard of Zippy the chicken. I've heard crickets about this. And so do the bars want to get in the business of evaluating whether or not these awards are real or not? I don't know. Having said that, a lot of the bar regulation stuff that I deal with from a marketing perspective is around protecting the public, right? You can't say you're the best lawyer, but you can say you're a top 10% if someone else says it's the case, even if that was the same award that a chicken got.
Well, this is all subjective, there's no, other than potentially Avo's resume rating.
But at least there's a process, right? Super Lawyers has a process. Like there's a thing that people are doing. Whether or not you agree with that process or not, the process can't be you filled out a form and gave me your credit card.
Right. Well, do lawyers have First Amendment rights when it comes to being able to say, I'm a this or I'm a that? I mean, obviously you have to be, I graduated from the University of Iowa with distinction. I can't say I graduated with high distinction or highest distinction. I can't say I was, on the law review, I was on the moot court board. So there are things I can say and can't say because they're factually correct and not factually correct. They can be verified. But who's going to be able to verify my last 35 years of practice, or if you're a lawyer, a young one, 5 years, in your ability to be, whether you're in the top 10%? Beyond the Avo yardstick that's used to measure the resume, what's the yardsticks that are out there?
Well, the interesting yardstick that when we did research, this was a really fascinating thing. When Mark Britton at Avo did a great job of trying to say, what do consumers care about? And so we did a ton of research into why people would hire a lawyer. And the number one thing that people wanted to know?
Communication.
It was the win rate, right? How many times does this lady win? Is she a winner or does she lose, right? And we know that the law is so much more nuanced than that. And it was just this very unhelpful thing that people wanted to know that was actually really...
And take me, for example.
Yeah.
I'm a defense lawyer.
Yeah.
So a win for me is a 0. It's not the big flashy, $10 million win that Larry H. Parker might get, or a plaintiff's lawyer. It's a 0 because my client doesn't have liability to the plaintiff. Or in a lot of cases, as everybody knows, 95% or so of all cases settled. Practically every single one of the settlements I've handled over the course of my career has been confidential.
Right.
It's not published in verdicts and settlements.
Right.
So there's no way to measure my success rate based upon my quote unquote wins because they're not measurable. There's no statistic out there where it can be measured.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And this is again why Joe Consumer can't get access to that information, right? And so Joe Consumer is looking for these different things that he or she believes is going to indicate the quality of the counsel that he is buying. And sometimes it's lawyers of distinction.
Right, but we all know too that the person that graduated first in his class may not make, or her class may not make the best litigation lawyer or contracts lawyer or whatever it is. I mean, those particular things are not directly correlated, are they?
No. And in fact, certainly some of the PI people that I talk to will tell me that they did terribly in law school and they're, very successful as attorneys because they did poorly in law school, right? It's partly a personality thing.
Right. Well, there's a belief among many people in the military that were the so-called Mustangs, the ones that served first as enlisted down in the ranks, make better officers than the ones that went to the academies because they had real life experience and know what it's like in the trenches. Same true for corporations. The quintessential started out in the mailroom, become president.
Right. And this is why all kids should have a terrible summer job because you'll know what it's like to have a bad job.
Yeah. I mean, I believe as I look back on my life, my first job was watering 10,000 geraniums in a greenhouse.
Right.
I got replaced by a drip water system.
I was a janitor. That was my first round.
Well, let's get back to this award thing. Is there a hard and fast line that you can give to lawyers and to consumers to evaluate these things? And should it be just as simple as if you have to pay for it, then you shouldn't get it?
I don't think so, because I think some of the awards, like the pay for it piece, like just because you're paying for it doesn't mean it is an illegitimate award. There may be a high level of correlation between those two things, right? But, there's just because you have to pay for it, I don't think that's the case. Let me use this example. We'll move outside of legal. All of you have flipped to the back of an airline magazine and you found a best plastic surgeon in Arizona, best plastic surgeon in Washington. And there are two elements that go into that. One is there's a very thin vetting process to make sure that that person should be there. And two, that's an advertisement, right? Those people are paying that third party to be in there.
Those are there's an Orange County magazine that publishes the same types of annual lists, and they are paid advertisements. I've gotten solicitations for them. I've refused them, but I know lawyers that use it. Yeah.
And so there's a thin vetting process in those. I don't love them, but it's two steps. One, a thin vetting process, and two, a check. And it's usually a pretty big check. So I would say just because you pay for something doesn't mean that it's necessarily illegitimate. I think that might be drawing the line too hard. Having said that, many of these are so fraudulent that only the most naive or egotistical or both attorney wouldn't recognize it for what it is. And I think if you recognize it for what it is, I don't think you should play that game.
So if that nagging little voice in the back of your head tells you no, listen to it.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, instinct goes a long way, right? And if it's that nagging voice in the back of your head, do the research. Like, here's the funny thing. Whenever Lawyers of Distinction sends out their mass emails telling everyone that they've been nominated for an award, and I get these emails too. I get nominated for the Lawyers of Distinction award. And I haven't even
attorney.
I've never stepped foot in a law school. Like right? And what I like to see is I always know when they sent it out because our traffic on our website explodes because people are vetting it, right? You're doing a modicum of due diligence to determine what this thing is. And I've written about it. Caroline Elephant's written about it. Like, a lot of people have written about this. It's not that hard to sniff this one out. Now, are there others? Sure, right? But do a little bit of research, especially if you're going to be spending money on it. Spending money on fraud for your own ego and marketing,
Let's talk about the ones that are legitimate. We can rattle off. Would you put super lawyers in that category?
I mean, they all have a process, right? They all
so
have a.
If you have a process, are you legitimate?
I think
Other than just a credit card.
Let me use that example. So, a lot of these are recognition within the industry, right? Which is basically how well do you network?
Barfly.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that makes you a good lawyer. It means you're a good networker. It means you may be well known. It means you've been around for a while. It doesn't necessarily mean, or it means that you have a marketing department who is tasked with getting as many of these awards as you possibly can. And there's the tit for tat. So that happens. The interesting thing, the review, the directory review that is most used by attorneys right now, and the award that's most used by attorneys right now, Google reviews, right? And that happens actively and passively, right? So from a pure search perspective, the more reviews you have, the better you do in search results. But also, we know that those glowing reviews tend to turn people into clients. And so that's kind of this crowdsourced review approach where you're ostensibly measuring the bedside manner of the attorney, right? Were they attentive? Did they care about me? Were they nice? Was the front desk helpful? That has become the de facto review metric. And there are numerous problems with that as well, including bogus and fraudulent reviews. And so it's very hard for the consumer. I don't have a beautiful answer for you, Craig, where it's like, all right, if I was telling my brother how to select an attorney, where would you push that person on the web to find great information about how to work with someone? I don't know. And I've been doing this since 2006, right? It's kind of a sad answer to my career.
No, well, the whole thing is kind of a mess because it's not regulated. There's it's kind of a free enterprise situation in some instances. Well, Conrad, it's been a great discussion. It looks like we've just about reached the end of our program, so I want to take an opportunity here to invite you to share your final thoughts as well as your contact information, plug your podcast as well.
Yeah, well, nice to chat with you again. It has been far too long. And the good thing for me is my name is Conrad Saam with 2 A's, S-A-A-M. So I'm super, super easy to find anywhere on the web. And if you want to listen to Lunch Hour Legal Marketing, you missed me. We dressed up today for our recording for the Halloween episode. I was in full mummy gear. So we did that with Geet Sakalakis. But really, really appreciate having you have me on. And the most important directory that you can get are your ex-clients, right? Who are your ex-clients? Have you done an amazing job for them? Have you kept in touch with them? Would they recommend you, right? And that is, it's as unregulated and as uncentralized you can get. But ultimately, I'm in the business of marketing law firms. My law firms that do best are the ones that need me the least, right? Because they're great lawyers. They do a great job with their clients. So it's not as sufficient just to be a great lawyer. You have to be amazing with your clients as well. But if you get that and you stay in touch with people, that makes the world of difference. And those law firms do better than any others. And that is the one piece of consistency I've seen over and over and over again, even though I'm in the business of marketing lawyers to people who don't know them.
Right. And the number one complaint to state bars by clients is that my lawyer is not communicating with me.
100%.
Well, Conrad, it's been great having you on the show today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For our listeners, if you like what you heard today, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcasting app. You can also visit us at LegalTalkNetwork.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter. And let me remind you that if you enjoyed this week's Lawyer to Lawyer with Conrad, go check out the brand new Lunch Hour Legal Marketing episode with Conrad and Yi, spotlighting the top 10 marketing horror stories. It's right here on Legal Talk Network. Listen, subscribe, and enjoy. Remember, if you like legal, think Lawyer to Lawyer. Thanks for listening today. I'm Craig Williams.
Thanks for listening to Lawyer, produced by the broadcast professionals at Legal Talk Network. Subscribe to the RSS feed on LegalTalkNetwork.com or in iTunes. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.
Workers' Comp Matters is a podcast dedicated to exploring the laws, the landmark cases, and the true stories that define our workers' compensation system. I'm Judd Pierce, and together with Alan Pierce, we host a different guest each month as we bring to life this diverse area of the law. Join us on Workers' Comp Matters on the Legal Talk Network.